You're listening to the Blue Lies podcast, where we uncover the truth about America's cops.
Imagine an America without law and order. A mobocracy where the government submits to the demands of domestic terrorists, where criminals are glorified and police are vilified. Imagine an America where good is evil and evil is good, and the fascism our forefathers died to defeat is championed. Sadly, this is our America, an America that is turning our police into the enemy. Headlines read, "Officers assaulted Birmingham," posted on social media. Criminals paid in San Francisco for not shooting anyone. NFL honors gunman who live-streamed police pursuit and shot at cops. School resource officer fired for her thin blue line flag. This is just the beginning of the war on justice and America's cops. But one retired cop is speaking out. I'm Jeff Wolf. I spent 20 years in the law enforcement community, and now I'm standing up for America's cops. Join me for the next few minutes for the Blue Lies podcast. My guest today is police officer Josh Hilling. I became acquainted with Officer Hilling not only through learning about his deadly force encounter a few years back on an interstate here in the Cincinnati area, but when I realized that our wives worked together at a local hospital. So that's how I really got acquainted with Officer Hilling. He worked for a local agency on the outskirts of Cincinnati here where we live. And back just a few years ago, he was involved in a deadly force encounter. And in that deadly force encounter, it was March 29th, 2016, if I'm not mistaken. He was encountering a pedestrian walking on the interstate, stopped to give him a ride, and it went south. This attacker had just committed a murder in Maryland just days before coming in contact with Officer Hilling on the interstate on this particular day. And when he attacked him with a knife, the fight was on. So it is a privilege and a pleasure to have a 12-year veteran of the police profession, Officer Josh Hilling, on this episode of Blue Lies. How you doing, Josh?
Great. Thanks for having me.
Well, I know you've probably told this story many times from beginning to end, beginning with internal investigations and then on to the prosecutor and everyone else. Luckily, you were cleared of this shooting. It was deemed justifiable because this perpetrator attacked you with a knife. One of the things that one of the things I've done in preparation for writing Blue Lies and publishing Blue Lies and continuing the conversation is talking about deadly force encounters. If America has ever seen deadly force encounters on a regular basis between the police and the public, it is now, because everything is on video. You and I probably both have heard a supervisor or a chief of police or a trainer say, just assume everything is recorded and on video and may be published to social media before your shift is over. And that is truly the case. And of course, now we have body cams. Your incident was captured on body cam. The last few years of my career, I was wearing a body cam, and those body cams have really proven to be I believe beneficial. There's a lot of skeptical cops out there, but it's cleared me and in just basic citizen complaints here and there when things would be misrepresented or just flat lies would be told about my personal handling of a situation. And my body cam is what cleared me because it's all on video. And so America has seen everything going on video, whether it's bystander video, whether it's a body cam, or whether it's someone's cell phone video. And so now we live in an environment in America, and what many of us have called the most serious war on police that America has ever experienced, that when you see a body cam video or a bystander pedestrian video of any use of force encounter with a police officer, the media mob will automatically skew that against the police. And often, as I've said, it's not a full body of evidence that you see on the internet or social media or the news. It is a capsulated, clipped video. And what people don't see is what happened right before the video starts and what happened after the video starts. In your case, your deadly force encounter began just trying to help a motorist. And because even in such what many people would call a routine action of a police officer, you stayed vigilant. And that's probably why you're still alive to tell your story. So take a few minutes. Tell us what happened. Go into as much or as little detail as you want. And let's talk about why America doesn't completely understand what they see when they see a deadly force encounter or a use of force with police on social media or the news. You have a happy ending to your story. That's not always the case. Start just by giving us a little background and get into your story and kind of set up that day for us.
Okay. Came in that day like any other day. Shift started at 7 a.m. We worked 12-hour shifts, so I was getting ready for a full day, 7 a to 7 p. That day was no different. Started with briefing, got logged onto my computer, got my cruiser all set up, and I was out and about on my way. The area that I patrol is a suburban area, low volume of calls of service. I was just out on what you would say is routine patrol that day. It was about the middle of the afternoon, middle of my shift, around 1 o'clock. I decided I was going to jump on the interstate. I was going to head down. I always make people laugh. I was just looking to go grab lunch that day. I was going to get off at the next exit, see what I wanted, whatever I was kind of feeling that day. And I just happened to see a gentleman walking on the side of the highway. As you know, in Ohio, it is illegal to walk on the highway. But I stopped all right, I need to get him off the highway because it's just not safe for someone to be walking up here. That's why you're not allowed walking up there. You're not allowed riding a bike. It's just dangerous. Right. You got cars flying, up and down the highway doing 60, 70, 80 miles an hour, if they're following the rules. So I pulled over, introduced myself, started making small talk with him. Hey, how did you get here? I didn't see a car around. Where are you heading? He advised me that he was walking from the Dayton area. And in my head, I was like, there's no way that he was able to walk on the interstate that long without
just
either
for reference
local
for people who
department.
don't know, Dayton is about an hour from Cincinnati down I-75.
Yes, yeah. From Dayton to the Cincinnati area is about 60-minute drive. So that's a long trek for somebody to walk. And you got local police departments and state troopers out there. Somebody would have stopped to kind of figure out what was going on. I didn't see a car around. So I started talking to him, asking him his name. He started telling me his name, and then he kind of backtracked a little bit. Then he tried spelling it for me, and then he kind of switched some letters and changed some letters around on me. At this point, I thought something was a little off or weird. Mm-hmm. So continued kind of that small talk, asked him for some ID. Didn't have any, asked him for a social, didn't have that either. I'm like, he had nothing at this point that would help me out to at least ID him. Because no matter what, I was getting him off the highway.
And to quote you, when we interviewed by phone for the book, you said your spidey senses were going off. In other words, every cop has it, regardless of what they call it. When something's not right or somebody's not telling the truth, it's almost immediately apparent. It's like a sixth sense.
Yeah, you just kind of get that kind of funny feeling. The hair kind of stands up on the back of your neck. Something just feels off. And I felt that. So then I started asking him about his backpack. Well, he's like, his old clothes. He handed it to me right away. I was like, all right, well, he's being compliant. Just something, he's not being fully truthful with what's going on. So I had decided still at that point, I was going to put him in the back of my cruiser and get him off the highway and get him somewhere safe. That way he was off the highway. He said he was heading towards Cincinnati. I was like, I'll at least get you south of where you're at.
Right.
But before I was going to put him in my cruiser, I wanted to make sure I was safe and he was safe. So I went to pat him down for officer safety.
Mm-hmm.
Once I said, I'm going to pat you down for officer safety, because I told him what I was going to do before I put my hands on him. He acted like he didn't hear me. And yes, the highway can be very loud with all the cars, but we had had an entire conversation the whole time. And he never once asked me really to repeat myself. So he asked me to repeat. And as I started to repeat, I'd put my hand up on his shoulder. And at that point, he started turning. I kind of pushed away and backed up. And that's when he turned around and brandished a knife and started charging at me. Once I was able to kind of collect myself and figure out exactly what was going on, mind you, everything's escalated at this point. It's going really fast, the way your mind kind of processes things. I was able to pull my duty weapon and fire one shot. Now, what I tell people, because they always ask, like, what were you thinking at that point? I was not thinking. Like, you just react to what you see. Yeah. So once that one shot went off, he went down. I kept backing up. And that's when I started to think, what have we just gotten ourselves into here?
Right. And everything you just described happened literally in a split second. That entire thought process that you just described, the action he took, literally it happens in mere seconds.
Yeah, and it happens so fast. And we're always told, like, you have unknown risk calls and high risk calls. There's no low risk. Well, this one was obviously unknown, something that you thought was so simple and pedestrian turned into a much bigger event. So once I fired that first shot and he went down, I was able to calm myself enough to start thinking of what I needed. Immediately got on the radio and, advised Hamilton County, hey, shots fired. Mm-hmm. And then they're going to drop tones. They're going to start sending me everybody. So I knew every police officer that had their radio on was coming my way.
Yeah.
But I'm still not out of harm's way because he didn't stay down. So he got back up, still had the knife, and continued to come towards me. Now, he wasn't moving as well as he was before because he had been shot in the abdomen.
Right.
But I was still kind of cornered in on the shoulder because I still had moving traffic heading southbound on 75. I was able to slowly make my way out, and, thank goodness for the people that saw me and were calling 911, telling dispatch that I needed help, that there was an officer out here in trouble, and cars were stopping and slowing. So as cars stopped, I was able to work my way out into the highway, and then like a big old semi stopped, and I had the whole highway at that point. Now, I was just on the entrance ramp, at the end of the entrance ramp, basically. So I knew all my help was going to be coming from my northbound, to come south to get to me. Well, at that point, they were going to be downrange. So I had to position myself so that all my help wasn't downrange of me. So as we moved out into the interstate, I was able to kind of go a roundabout way, kind of circle around out into the lanes of traffic, to where my background was now southbound. There wouldn't be any cars down there. That wouldn't be where all my officers were coming from. That way we didn't have a crossfire situation. Once I did that, I was still able to keep my distance, which gave me time. As we all know, time is very precious in these kind of events, and you need that space. That way you don't end up compressing it and kind of jamming yourself up to where you have to act and do something. So I was able to keep that space, had other officers from my department and surrounding departments show up on scene. Again, people talk about my restraint. I think about every officer that was there. Nobody else fired a shot either. And luckily, we did not carry tasers at that point, but an officer from another department did. He pulled it, fired it, it connected, he went down. We were able to get the knife and then place him under arrest. At the same time, where officers were still there to help people, we made sure that he got the right medical assistance that he needed and got to the hospital.
The story, just listening to it again, even though I know what happens, it's still, anytime you listen to a story like this, makes your blood pressure rise. I'm sure when you tell it, it probably does the same thing.
Yeah, it kind of takes you back to that time, and watching that video, like body cam, really puts you back in that mind frame.
I can only imagine. And the number of times you have relived that scenario in your mind are probably just innumerable. Something like that just never leaves you. You were cleared of that shooting. Hamilton County prosecutor ruled it justifiable, and as he should have. You just, as you told me for our interview, you said, I just stopped to give the guy a ride and he tried to kill me. That's what a lot of people, I think, Joe and Jane Public, don't realize about police work. You know, sometimes officers are accused of being short or a little sharp, or, you know, not very cordial, or perhaps some cops are talkers, some aren't, you know, and so when people have interaction with the police, sometimes they can misread that. And what I've always told people is, I don't know you. You know, it's not personal. I'm going to be as professional as I can, but I don't know you. I don't know what you may be about to do. And so I was always a stickler on reactionary distance. I was always a stickler on not making small talk other than, hi, how you doing, kind of a thing. Because it's so easy to get distracted just trying to, you know, just have a conversation that whole time they could be planning to kill you. And that's exactly what this guy was doing. He was, in my estimation, you probably have thought this too, that he was waiting for an opportunity, that if you got too curious, then he was going to use any opportunity he could to take you out. Fortunately, you were vigilant. You allowed your training to kick in. That's what another thing people don't understand is training takes over. I have drawn my weapon. Fortunately, I've never been in a deadly force encounter. I don't tell people that I retired from law enforcement so much as I tell them that I survived law enforcement. I was never in that situation, so I don't even have a frame of reference to identify with you in that situation. However, I have pointed my firearm at many people over the years, and there were times that I don't remember actually drawing my gun, because it's like a sixth sense. It's like muscle memory. Training kicks in, which is exactly what you describe. You weren't thinking. You didn't make a conscious decision to draw the weapon. You just drew the weapon, and of course, fired at the guy who was trying to attack you. What you didn't know, that you found out later, was that Pablo Javier Ailman, if I'm pronouncing his name correctly, 12 days prior to you meeting him on March 29th, had stabbed to death his landlord in Baltimore County, Maryland. And he was on the run because he had just murdered somebody just a few days earlier. So perhaps... you know, obviously, when you begin to ask him for his information, that's why he wasn't going to be honest with you, because the man had just murdered someone. And he was, however he got to the Cincinnati area, who knows, you know. I didn't read all of the court documents, but that's something that you didn't know at the time. Had you known what this guy had done, you would obviously handled that situation differently and been more prepared because of your knowledge. But that's what the public don't understand a lot of times, is that when you and I as police officers walk up on somebody, we could just be doing it like you were, to give somebody a ride, get them off the highway. It's not about enforcement action all the time. It's, like you said, sometimes just about helping somebody out and not knowing what may be behind this. What may they have as a motivator to try to bring harm to you or kill you? And your situation is just a classic example of that, how you had no idea this guy had just killed somebody in Maryland and was on the run. And because of your diligence and because of your training and because of your, creating that distance in that situation and logically thinking through the steps that you needed to take, you didn't become the second victim, and I applaud you for that. Just in the way of putting an end on the story for folks who are curious and are probably right now, as they watch or listen to this, they're Googling this guy's name, trying to figure out what happened. Pablo Javier Ailman recovered from his wound, his one gunshot wound, and was convicted of felonious assault on a police officer, you being the victim. And he will serve a sentence total of 11 years in an Ohio prison before he is extradited back to Maryland and consequently face the consequences for his murder charge, for which he did plead guilty for that murder charge. So when he's done here, he's going back home to serve. I don't know what his sentence is, but he'll be serving a long time in Maryland when he gets back there after serving his sentence in this case. So I'm so glad to be able to talk to you, Josh, and have this story with a happy ending. Because as you know, we have many comrades in arms who did not have a happy ending to their deadly force encounter. And I think that your actions, your training, and thinking your way through that situation is what saved your life. Now, the question that I gave and kind of proposed to you as I was preparing for the book and interviewing you over the phone was, you fired once, he went down, but he got back up and he continued to try to close the distance between he and you with a knife in his hand, if I'm telling that correctly. Is that correct?
Correct.
Okay.
Yes.
So my question to you was, and obviously I was not there. I'd seen the body cam video, but I was not there. So my question to you was, you had every right, justifiably, to shoot him again, but you didn't. Why?
Correct. And I get asked this question a lot. And unfortunately, I got asked it a lot right after the shooting. And right after an event like that, I just wasn't prepared to answer it. Sure. You don't have the confidence. You're still second guessing everything that you did. Mm-hmm. But, I've seen the body cam footage numerous times now. I was there.
I'm sure.
And now I can just kind of talk about it freely and openly because I've come to terms with every decision that I made that day. Like, I am lucky enough, as you said, I still have my job. I still have my freedom. I'm still alive. So those are all things that, I really don't take for granted. And I consider myself very lucky. That day, it was some training, it was some skill, and there was a little bit of luck involved. Yeah. What I would say, the reason that I didn't shoot again was training. Okay. I have never been in the military. Okay. I know training for the military, people talk about as parallel to law enforcement. The hierarchy, the academies, the physical grind of it and things like that. However, in the police academy, in all of our training, we are taught to neutralize the threat. Mm-hmm. So I encountered a deadly force. I fired my weapon. Once I fired that weapon, I took my time, not that much time because it was happening so fast, and I reassessed my situation. So once you do that reassessment, all right, he's not running at me at full speed anymore. He's not near as close to me as he was. I have somewhat neutralized that threat because the threat of deadly force was still there. Yes, he was still threatening me with the knife, but I had created distance, and with that distance, I created myself some time. So
time is your friend in that situation.
Absolutely, and time is always our friend. If you can get yourself some distance, you can really help yourself out to make decisions.
I want to point out, too, when we were interviewing, and I was reading the article and some of the news clippings about this guy was basically screaming at you to kill him over and over and over and over.
Yes. So what I can't prove it. What I think was if he was able to get a hold of me and stab me and put me down, he was going to go on the run again. Mm-hmm. Since it didn't go his way, he was like, I have no way out. And it turned into more or less a suicide by cop situation. But I didn't listen to him, as most police officers will say. You don't tell me how to do my job. I control the scene and the situation to the best of my ability. And that's what I was trying to do. So I believe that one shot slowed him down enough. I was able to get my back up there. All these other officers were assessing and reassessing when they got there as well. And they felt that they were able to keep their distance. We were able still to keep the public safe. Yes, he got close to some of those cars on the highway, as you can see in the body cam footage, but they're at least in a car that's closed, so they're secure there. At some point, yeah, we were eventually going to run out of room, but it didn't come to that. And somebody, because we still had lethal coverage, was able to go to less lethal and use a taser. Now, if I was out there with a taser, I still wouldn't have used it first because I'm encountering deadly force. That taser fails,
You don't
I'm
bring
out
a
of
knife
luck.
to a gunfight, right?
Correct. Correct. So a lot happened in a very short amount of time. A lot of officers were there, and everybody just kind of stayed in their spot, knew their role, and we were able to get somebody off the street that didn't need to be out there.
Josh, your story, just every time I think about it, is just amazing because it had a happy ending for you, not so much for the bad guy, because he did not get what he wanted. He did not get killed by a policeman. He lived to have justice served and ended up in prison where he belongs. And it's an amazing story because not every story ends that way. As you know, you've been doing some training with the Police Executive Research Forum. As you know, a lot of cops and their deadly force encounters, it is either them or the bad guy, and they have to make the tough choice to fire more than once. As you said, you were in a very unique situation. But the reason that I wanted to feature your story in Blue Lies is because it debunks the lie that is perpetrated by the media mob in a lot of places that police are just racist killers, trigger happy, and just looking to terrorize, whether it's just the general public or someone of color or some sort of racist element to it. And that's not true at all, because if you were just a murderer, you would have murdered him. You would have killed him. You had the legal justification to do so, in my summation, based on my assessment of that situation. But you didn't. And that is proof that cops are not just killers. We're not just trigger happy killers. We are faced with a very, very difficult job. We put our lives on the line on a daily basis. Every time you put on the uniform and you leave your home, you know you are taking a risk not to come back. And so I get so sick and tired of people bad-mouthing law enforcement and categorizing all of us as just trigger-happy killers. That's not true. You had justification, but you used restraint because it wasn't necessary. You were able to create distance. You were able to have time. You were able to think logically through the situation. You were able to get help there so that, you weren't out there by yourself and you weren't outnumbered. The fact that he was not dead, but he was weakened and incapacitated partially, not to be able to get to you. You obviously were able to create distance because that bullet that you fired did impair his ability to carry out his objective, which was to kill you. So you are just a classic example of what I believe American police officers all over the country are. Normal men and women who have families, who have children, who are just trying to do what they know they've been called in this life to do and to survive it and come out the other side. Many times doing so, like you did on this particular day, not knowing who this person is, what they're capable of, and what they might do. And so my hat's off to you, sir, for how you handled this. I know that this was a very, very high-profile thing in Cincinnati, but obviously in other places, stories like yours don't get told on the national level. So I felt it necessary to feature that in the book and use the connection between our wives at work to get in touch with you and kind of learn more about it. My wife doesn't work there anymore. She works from home now. But is there anything you'd like to say before we end this conversation? We have a few minutes left. I'm glad that you were able to come and share this deadly force encounter with us, your experience. Obviously, we could talk all afternoon about what happened after you pulled the trigger. Luckily, you got out of this with not only your life, but your freedom. But there are a lot of cops that have been in your situation and they end up indicted. They end up fired. Their due process is taken away. Their constitutional rights are infringed upon. because they had to make a split-second decision to do something that they never wanted to do in the first place. Luckily, your situation didn't end up that way. Your story has a happy ending. Is there anything that you want to share about that experience before we wrap it up?
Yeah, kind of piggyback on what you were talking about with officers going out there and we just want to do our job and we want to do it to the best of our ability. I've never met an officer who's wanted to use force. You use force because it's necessary. And I'd follow that back up with, I don't think the general public quite understands after a use of force incident, and you touch on it in your book, you have your criminal investigation that is done on the suspect and the police officer. You're going to have your civil lawsuits. You have all your policy and procedures for your internal as well. So it is a lot of stress on not only the officer that was involved, but their family, because their family has to go through it too. Right. I was on administrative leave for a week. I'm sitting at home with my wife, and we only had 2 kids at the time. We're up to 4 now.
Congratulations.
Wondering what's going on. What does this process look like? How long is it going to take? Is all my hard work, and I'm finally became a police officer full time, because I'd only been a full time police officer for 3 months when this happened. So all my hard work and everything that I sacrificed gone in the blink of an eye. So 3 minutes of unbelievable stress on that highway. I can't even put it into words, but the stress for myself and my family that follows a use of force or a deadly encounter, unbelievable amount of stress that it really puts on your family and friends.
And I know we talked about this too in our phone interview, that this was going on right after a case you and I are very familiar with here in Cincinnati. It was Cincinnati police officer who was on a traffic stop and ended up using force and killing African-American male, was indicted, went through 2 trials. Both were mistrials. A lot of controversy here in Cincinnati over that case. And so, as you mentioned when we were interviewing, this had just happened not too long before your situation happened. I know that had to just completely weigh on your mind when you were waiting for that magic phone call to find out what your future was going to be after pulling the trigger.
Absolutely. Lucky for me, when I'm in the field, I don't think about all that extra noise that's kind of going on. And I do feel it is having a negative effect on officers in the field right now, to where we're hesitating to make a decision and use force just because of the different things that are kind of going on in society. And it's really sad and upsetting. At the same time, I'm not thinking about it in the field because I know what I have to do, and I always do things to the best of my ability. But in the aftermath, that's exactly where my head went.
Yeah. And I think that's what Joe Public doesn't realize, is when police officers are faced with those situations because of the unfair treatment of police officers that's happened, and all of this defund, disarm and disband the police nonsense. And, there is such unfair scrutiny on police officers to the point of them getting indicted and fired and all of this other stuff before an investigation can even be accomplished. It is causing hesitation. Police officers are hesitating. And again, your situation was unique and it had a happy ending for you. But sometimes hesitation is a killer. And there are so many situations in which an officer hesitated and it cost him his life. One of the biggest ones is Kyle Dinkeller, who wears a badge, has not seen the Kyle Dinkeller video, the South Carolina deputy who was murdered back in the 90s when dash cam was just, still a VHS tape that went in the trunk of the car. That's a classic example of hesitation, not wanting to use deadly force. So, Josh, thanks so much for taking time to tell me the story. I know it's got to be emotional every time that you go back to that moment, you relive it, and you tell the story. But I appreciate it, and I believe it helps Joe and Jane Public understand not only what a police officer is risking when he puts on the badge, but the fact that we are not all just violent thugs. We are sheepdogs, as Lieutenant Colonel Dave Grossman puts it, and we have answered the calling to stand between the sheep and the wolf, and I'm glad you survived your deadly force encounter. Again, thanks again for joining me, and I'm sure we'll have a chance to talk in the future.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. I really appreciate it.
Yes, sir. I hope you have been informed and educated by our conversation today. If you want to know more, the truth is uncovered in my Amazon bestseller, Blue Lies: The War on Justice and the Conspiracy to Weaken America's Cause. Get it on Amazon or at blueliesbook.com. Let our heroes know that you back the blue, and stay safe. Remember, a police officer fights not because he hates what's in front of him, but because he loves who stands behind him.